Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of Retail Media Thursdays. I'm Dan Sherring, RVP EMEA here at Skai, and today I'll be joined by SEO guru Dan Liddle from iCrossing. Right, Dan, thanks for joining us today. I thought we'd just start off with learning a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm a senior SEO director at iCrossing. My sort of thing that I've been trying to do the last couple of years is really sort of pushing SEO innovation and scalability, which is nice because it kind of ties into what we sort of do day to day with sort of it on the agency side of things. And I think it's really important for SEO, especially at the moment, and we'll probably talk about this because everyone always asks me about this, is about generative AI and ChatGPT, but it's really important at the moment that, you know, that's sort of adopted and pushed through, because all that stuff is coming and it's going to be quite messy. So,
well, definitely some of the subjects we're going to talk about later on, which I'm really excited to dive into. Now, before we get into that, we'd like to start with what we call Peak of the Week. So, you know, what's been your highlight of the week so far?
Ties a little bit into AI. So Google UK released an economic impact report, and they've just said, you know, that the increase that AI can bring to the economy could be around 400 billion by 2030, which obviously is catastrophic, it's amount. And I suppose it's one of those things, again, where, you know, the practitioners and the ones that's going to adopt it earlier are going to be the ones that are going to sort of benefit from that. And luckily, in our place, I mean, I started using OpenAI back in 2020 when it was really rudimentary. Like, it was really bad in terms of its output. But it's nice to see now that, you know, it's being adopted and people are sort of future thinking about this and thinking about how they can use it in digital marketing, especially in the retail media side of things as well.
Fantastic. So it sounds like you're pretty well set for what's coming in the future.
Nearly. I don't think anyone's completely set, but getting there.
Excellent. And we're here today at the Windsor Castle Pub. Love to know why you chose today's pub.
I would go back to sort of SEO. You know, the Windsor Castle, it's been around thousands of years. It's had many changes, but the platform has stayed the same. So it's a lot like what I do sort of day to day, where there's lots of different changes going on the site and you're having to deal with like the platform and stuff. But at the end of the day, you know, it attracts visitors. So
I love that. It's nice to also come to a pub that I haven't been to before. So thanks for joining us today. Now, I want to dive into some of the more juicy parts of today's session. So I think our subscribers would love to know a little bit more about iCrossing and the role that iCrossing plays in this kind of ever-expanding world of retail media and the ecosystem. Yeah,
so the benefit of iCrossing is our parent company is Hearst Media. So that means we have access to a lot of publication data, so the likes of like Digital Spy, Cosmopolitan, and a lot of that is just data that they have. No one else has this data, and we can use that data in terms of what's trending, seasonality, and a lot of sort of upcoming data that we can sort of apply to a lot of sort of the clients that deal with retail media, and particularly e-commerce, to help them get like a foot forward, because a lot of, again, retailers do not have that data that we have. So that's kind of our USP in that sense. But we cover stuff around technology, creative content, different sorts of media, and we're a global agency as well. So that's the benefit of sort of connecting to the different localization parts of that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I love that USP of, you know, everyone talks about data, right? Yeah. But how you can use it and use it effectively is always the key. And it sounds like you may have well unlocked some of that secret with
exactly
some of the customers you're working with.
Yeah, I think it's really important as well for people just to harness their first party data. It's something that we constantly say to clients is just, you know, you do have data, you can use it, you don't have to go outside. Really harnessing that, because that stuff is more reactive, it's sort of more pure, and there's a lot more insights that can be pulled from it.
I couldn't agree more. We often talk, specifically more in the search world, the power of first-party data and owning that data, and how you can leverage that for things like optimization, audience generation, you know, exactly. So on and so forth. So a really interesting part. Now, obviously you're an SEO specialist, so it would be remiss of us not to spend a few questions covering that off. So, I mean, when I kind of look at SEO, especially within the retail media world, it often feels like you know, somewhat of the forgotten child in comparison to paid media that seems to, you know, take all the attention and all the hype. I'd love to know what you think makes, why SEO in Amazon, for example, is so important. And further to that, if we think about the role of SEO in Amazon, are there any particular verticals or categories where it's even more relevant to have a super strong SEO program?
Yeah, it's a good question because it is a challenging one. We sort of get this from a lot of clients all the time in terms of what sort of the difference as well. But I think in terms of SEO is sort of your sort of foundation, because paid. You always use this analogy in terms of paid is basically like you're installing a tap. So if you turn the tap off or you don't pay your bill, you don't have any traffic water. Whereas SEO is more like creating a waterfall. Like you're getting that constant stream that comes through. But obviously to get the waterfall, it takes a bit of time. And that is sort of the biggest barrier that I think people have investing SEO is it's not quick wins, it's long term, but the benefits come later on. And they're sustainable as well to a point in terms of if Google changes their algorithms or Amazon does, but that's a different thing. But generally, like that's sort of the two different approaches. You're thinking like more quick wins, then you're thinking like how do we sort of build up the brand so it can exist more sustainably, and if that's across Google or Amazon, they're both similar because users kind of search kind of in different ways, but essentially they're doing sort of the same activity on both of them.
Really interesting. And do you think that there are any particular verticals or categories where it's more relevant for having a strong SEO program within Amazon?
Yeah, it's going to be the highly competitive ones because obviously you want to get in those. So off the top of my head, things like electronics, home devices, beauty products, those sort of places are the places you sort of want to invest your SEO into that because, from a paid side of things, really, really super duper competitive, really hard to sort of gauge the intent of the user from, what they're typing in. Definitely those sort of solid categories where, they've always been competitive. They're not going to stop being competitive. So it's really crucial that you sort of build that foundational effort so you can sort of continue that sort of evergreen growth that comes in.
Of course. And do you find a lot of the time you're having to educate clients on, moving away from the short-termism of quick wins on paid media to think about that longer-term strategy? I
think it's almost like a total search approach. So it's not a case of once you do SEO, you don't do ads. They work in tandem because there's different insights we can get from different places. One of the things we do a lot with clients, especially if they don't have a strong SEO foundation, is go to paid because SEO data doesn't provide enough in terms of conversions and the user experience. We sort of solely rely on click-through rates and traffic. So for instance, like we work with like a lot of luxury brands. So based on keyword research, it's very difficult to tell from sort of the top keyword terms what sort of level the user is looking for, because the thing that we constantly see at the search at the moment, especially in terms of the economic client, is users want choice. And a lot of luxury brands obviously cannot provide that. Hence why they go to things like Amazon, because it provides choice. They probably have logins for that, so it's an easier purchase journey. So there is like a lot of convincing to do, but it's sort of making sure that there's sort of that cross-channel approach and knowing when sort of organic picks up, then paid can sort of dial down and then go into other areas. So for me, like the paid space is like the first point of call, and then SEO is sort of that more sort of long tail. And we're almost like always catching up with paid, but we do get there eventually.
I can imagine that being the case, especially with some of the conversations that we have on a daily basis with clients. I mean, we touched upon it very, very briefly there, but how do you think brands should approach, an SEO program on Amazon as opposed to an SEO program on Google? Are they similar? Should they be treated differently? And ultimately, do you think that there's some advantages to be taken if we think about them together more holistically?
Definitely. That's a really good question because I think the two different parts of Amazon and Google is different intent. So Google, can carry a lot of intents, but most of the time it's very top of the funnel. People are starting their journey on Google. Amazon, on the other hand, people are looking to purchase. So two very different intents. And in terms of the SEO on both of them, Google, a bit more complicated because you've got to decipher what the intent is. Amazon, a bit more straightforward, you know what the intent is, but then you have to deal with, okay, again, what's the intent of the user? Are they looking for, is it price a problem in this aspect? Is it highly competitive? What are the functions of the product that you're trying to sell? Is that actually matching the intent as well? So there's two different approaches with it, and also, you know, with Google, you're optimizing your domain, whereas with Amazon, you're optimizing your listing, and almost like you sort of have a bit more control on Amazon because there's only so much you can do. With Google, it's just endless. You could do so much. You could build other websites. Like, at least with Amazon, you know, it's a very controlled aspect. It's a very tight way of sort of optimizing stuff, which is good in a nice way. But there is a way that, because obviously Amazon gets listed in Google, and again, going back to the luxury clients, what we see time and time again when the intent is sort of choice, Amazon will appear in number one. And instead of going, you know, we should try and outrank Amazon, which is not going to happen.
With all the will in the world, I don't think it will happen, yeah.
Let's instead look at our Amazon listings, if they're there, and optimize those because, you know, they're going to click on Amazon. Isn't it better that our products appear there first compared to on Google, essentially?
I think that's, you know, a great way to kind of put it, and it's a different way of thinking for brands. I'd imagine that's quite a challenge with the luxury brands in terms of that kind of education and new way of thinking, you know, about it. Kind of moving tack slightly, you know, as you probably know, Skai produce a annual state of retail media study. You know, we canvass hundreds of brands, thousands of marketeers across a range of subjects. One of the things that leapt out at me was that 60% of those respondents agreed that retail media is really becoming the new sort of slotting fee, right? That fee that brands pay to have their, you know, products, you know, on display in traditional retail, right? Do you think that retail media is really becoming more pay to play? And if that is the case, how do you think brands really win in that scenario?
Yeah, really good question, because I think when it's kind of similar a lot against other channels, but it's all about what you do with your data, because it's about being smart with it. Like, you've got all this data, what do you do with it? A lot of people will sort of go for like the top terms, spend loads of money. The ROI is probably very poor. What we need to do is actually be smart with it, like do small incremental tests with it as well, especially if you're sort of a smaller brand, and probably when they come into this space they're just like, oh my god, this is insane. Like, I'm having to spend this much. But it's better to sort of be innovative in that area, like be sort of like a purveyor of, you know, starting small and then growing that up based on insights, instead of coming in and going headfirst into, you know, just spending too much money. Better to spend that incrementally, build the insights, and then scale that upwards, rather than just going in hard, essentially.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, there's you've seen a few examples of brands just literally throwing money into the pot, and often that's not a great strategy.
And
right?
that's annoying from our side, because we're looking for competitor insights and we can't see their conversion data. But then when you like speak to other brands, they're like, yeah, that's all we're doing. It's oh, there's no insight there at all.
That's it. I think, you know, as we get more into this environment, right, those insights and the power of those insights becomes a lot more understandable at the brand level, right? And people will slowly start adopting those practices. We talked about it at the top, right? Generative AI, ChatGPT. I think for anyone that was at Cannes a couple of weeks ago, it was the talk of the town, right? It's also the talk of our industry, and you know, the impact that generative AI and ChatGPT will have on search, you know, both across organic and paid.
Yeah.
How do you see that yourself, and what do you think the future holds with the influence of ChatGPT and generative AI?
Yeah, it kind of all just comes back to data, because the issue that we're going to have, particularly in a search space, is if users start to interact with like Amazon or Google or any other sort of platform where you search, there's going to be so much more data, and we're going to be so less reliant on head terms, and basically things are going to get weird. So what we need to sort of do is make sure we're quantifying that data and make sure it's sort of easily accessible to gain insights, because otherwise it's just going to become too overwhelming. It's going to be really hard to pull stuff out. A good sort of benchmark from this was sort of the pandemic era, where basically search was flipped on its head. All the data that was based on there previously became useless, and we needed to be more reactive. And that's sort of what we need to get more into. We need to stop relying on sort of data that's like 12 months old. We need to get really into what are people searching now, and adapting that and quantifying that. And from a client perspective, making sure it's all quantified and easily digestible, and so it's easy to see what the deliverables on that and how to target that. And I think as well, with all this generative AI stuff, I think there's a lot of speculation at the moment. And I think the actual practitioners of it are sort of being crowded out, because there's all this sort of ideas about, what we could do with it. There's not a lot about what's being done with it. And I think those are the sort of the people we need to listen to, because that's the things where we're going to see what are the results from that. I mean, Google particularly have said, generative AI is fine to use. If you want to use it to build content or things for ads, it's fine, but it has to add value. And I think a lot of people are sort of fearing at the moment that basically the internet's just going to become massive. Like, it's just going to become spammed with all this generative AI content. And from a Google perspective, and similar with like Amazon with their sort of sustainability initiatives, they can't crawl or digest all that much more content anymore. They need to really find, where the value is, what you're adding to it. And you can use generative AI with that, but it requires human collaboration. It's not relying on the algorithms point. Or another good thing is training them. You can train AI. You can, take a brand tone of voice or ad copy, and then train it on that and always QA it as well when you're doing that. So I think in terms of this space, it's exciting, but I think we should be less speculative and just start doing stuff with it, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really interesting point, right? It's, learning from what's happening now rather than talking about what the endless possibilities might be. And it's an important twist on the conversation that you hear, all too often in today's marketplace. And, I think, learning from where we can build and where we can understand how to use that more effectively. I don't know, there's a lot of sometimes consternation in terms of will it replace people? It will never replace people, because we need to be the controlling arm of it, right?
Exactly, and generative AI needs a prompt. It can't do stuff by itself, so the detail of that prompt is the thing that drives it, and that comes from us.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Well, Dan, thanks ever so much for your time today. We like to wrap up with some quick fire questions. So you won't have received these questions, and truth be told, I haven't written these questions down myself, so we're going to go completely off script. But I'd like to start with your favourite cuisine.
Oh, I have this chat a lot about, like, if you had to eat one food forever, what would you eat?
That was almost going to be a really specific question,
God.
so yeah.
I'd have to say pizza.
Yeah?
Yeah, because, I mean, you can have different toppings.
There's a lot of variety, right?
Exactly,
And no one ever got fired for ordering pizza, right?
I mean, it'd be weird for breakfast, but if you have to eat it,
Yeah, well, I've had a pizza dessert before with chocolate spread and marshmallows.
Oh, I've seen those,
it covers a lot of bases. So, favourite movie?
Oh, Blade Runner.
Blade Runner.
Which ties into the AI stuff.
Yeah,
Yep.
So I mean, having come from the 80s, and so you can probably guess when I was growing up, it was obviously the tune from Blade Runner was one of my all-time favourites. Favourite holiday destination?
Good question. It has to be Tokyo. I mean, it's one of those places where if you go and you could be there like a week, you still feel like you haven't done everything. And it's such like a culture shock. Like, it stays with you for because they're sort of the best holidays where it sort of impacts you that much. It sort of changes your view, and you almost like miss it as well, even if you're there a short time.
Japan's always been on my bucket list. I haven't quite made it there, so
I think it's
just
on everyone's.
fueling that fire for me. So I will definitely have to go. Favourite pastime over the weekend? What are you doing?
Oh, I'm learning to play guitar. I used to play when I was younger, but I had a really bad guitar teacher who'd only teach me Dire Straits songs. So
I mean, handy for one-off scenarios, I guess.
Yeah, so I'm learning to do that. I'm getting there. I know a few Cure songs now, so I'm getting there.
Excellent. And I've spent a lot of the last couple of weeks re-watching Glastonbury. Musical one to end with. Favourite band?
Oh,
I'm assuming it's not Dire Straits as well.
No, it's not. It's not really a band, but we've got Field Day coming up, and I'm going to see Aphex Twin, which is going to be really exciting. I love Aphex Twin. Yeah, that's going to be really exciting. Wanted to see him for ages, but it's probably going to be a bit wild. And also I went to a music festival a couple of weeks ago, and just going over 30, my stamina's awful. I start thinking about like, how am I going to get home? My legs start to ache, I start to get cramped, but yeah, it should be good.
It's funny how those things start to change. Yes, I was speaking to a colleague, and they've all just come back from Glastonbury, and I think my last one was about 5 years ago, and I'm very in that nervous period of can I even handle a festival these days? But Dan, it's been a real pleasure. Thanks for your time
Thanks
today,
for having me.
and finish our pints of Guinness. Cheers.
Great. Cheers.